Perfect. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. This is Kaustubh Jagtap, or KJ. I am the Director of Product Marketing here at SafeBreach. I wanted to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to attend our interactive fireside chat today. Before we get started, I wanted to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with all the registrants and attendees after the event is completed. At any given point of time, if you have any questions about the content or SafeBreach, please send them via the Q&A function that is available on Zoom webinar. We will be answering all those questions after the webinar. Uh, with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. As you all are aware, EDRs are one of the key security tools in any organizational organizational security stack. And selecting the right endpoint EDR tool, endpoint detection and response tool for your organization's specific needs and challenges is a critical part of securing your network. Breach and attack simulation tools can be a great ally when choosing the right EDR for your challenges, as they allow you to streamline and enhance the EDR selection process in a very objective manner. So today's webinar is a fireside chat where one of our customers, Olin, a global manufacturing company, will highlight how they leverage the SafeBreach platform to determine which EDR tool made the most sense to them based on their unique challenges. So let me go ahead and introduce today's panelists. It's Stephen Beasley from Olin and Shalini Relvani from SafeBreach, who will be moderating this session. Stephen is a seasoned professional in the cybersecurity space with over 2 decades of hands-on experience in demonstrating an unwavering commitment to protecting digital assets. Stephen's career has been marked by a relentless pursuit of knowledge and expertise in areas such as threat analysis, network security, pen testing, and incident response. Over the years, Stevens has become a trusted guardian of digital landscapes, successfully safeguarding organizations against the evolving threat landscape and providing invaluable guidance in crafting robust protection strategies. Shalini is our amazing customer success manager who's been at SafeBreach for the last 21 months. Her journey in cybersecurity space spans over a decade, during which she transitioned from being a sales in the sales field to specializing in customer success. Outside of helping her customers achieve success and the best implementation of their products, she also loves traveling and is a passionate globetrotter, exploring the world and finding harmony through yoga practice. So let's go ahead and get started. Shalini, over to you.
All right, let me just share my screen and we'll get started. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for your time today. Let's go ahead and get started. Stephen, really appreciate your time today. I wanted to bring us back to that moment where, Olin decided to do an EDR bake-off. What were the challenges that your organization was trying to address that led to your team deciding to conduct this bake-off?
Yeah, so just like any time in any security organization, there comes a time where your organization starts to shift, change, things start to evolve, if you will, and then EDRs change, and it just the existing EDR tool we had at the time, and then the direction our company was going just was not a good fit any longer. So we were having some challenges with that specific EDR tool not working well within our environment. So that's really started the journey, if you will, to go look for something else. And every security practitioner has been in that situation where, it comes time to look for something to replace what you already have, right? And then you have to ask the questions, what am I going to choose? What fits best for my environment? How do I know what fits best for my environment? What are the criteria I need to use in order to test if this is a good fit for me? All those different questions you have to ask yourself as a security practitioner. How do I choose, right? What is the best fit for the company? And so that's really kind of where this all started. Just the existing EDR was difficult to manage a little bit based off the needs of our company. The architecture didn't really flow with what we needed. Like you said, we are a manufacturing company, so we have a commercial side and we have an OT side. And then we have, stuff in the cloud, we have stuff on-prem. We're, a very diverse company across a global organization. We have different business groups that require different needs. So it was, a daunting task to figure out how do you figure out the best tool that will meet the needs of such a diverse organization. So that's kind of where we started to ask that question. What tool can we use to test these types of EDRs, at least partially test, right? Because you had to come up with the criteria, but also every EDR tool says we stop all the 0 days, we stop all the ransomware, and we stop all this and this type of activity on your endpoints. Well, they say that, and it's difficult to measure that in a way, right? So you can't. I mean, you can spend hours, months, and maybe even years downloading all the malware that's out there, downloading and executing on a lab workstation or some sort of VM. And you can go through those tasks, which are painstaking and take forever because after you compromise an endpoint, it's not like you can retest with another EDR tool. You have to completely reimage it and completely send it back to a baseline, right? So that all takes a lot of time. So that's where we chose SafeBreach, because SafeBreach was able to initiate some sort of scenario where we could push malware safely to an endpoint, roll it back so we can use that same endpoint for testing with the other EDR tools, as well as get a good baseline with the criteria that we set for what we're going to test, and then see how it stressed out the particular machine, right? So if you had a very minimal laptop with 8 gigs of RAM and a i7 processor, what's that going to do, right? Well, how is the endpoint going to be affected by ransomware or malware on the machine? And what is how when the EDR tool does respond, what's it going to do with the system resources of that machine? So we had a lot of different factors, a lot of different criteria to kind of run through, and so that's kind of where we ended up with selecting SafeBreach as one of the tools to use. Actually, it was a primary tool on how to select the EDR tool from the bake-off. So
Awesome. What were the different methodologies being considered to determine that the best EDR tool for your organization and which you finally chose?
yeah, good question. So again, finding that criteria, I didn't want to reinvent the wheel or try to build anything from the ground up. So I just looked at Gartner's critical capabilities for endpoint protection. I chose this because it has a lot of good baselines, a lot of good recommendations for EDR testing. It did a lot that I did not have to come up with, right? So that was my starting point. And I chose from that list, and then I looked at my business specific requirements. So again, global company, multiple business units. We like to say we manufacture bullets and bleach, right? So we have a chemical side and we have a ammunition side of our company, and so there's a different criteria for each one. So I had to come up with business specific requirements, which don't look unlike most companies that I've worked for. But again, they were business specific. So I had to, meld in my own business specific requirements along with the Gartner critical capabilities for endpoint protection, kind of marry those two together, figure out what fit, and then try to figure out how I could, I guess, set a weight for each one of those. So, each criteria outlined had a specific weight assigned to it so that I could choose which one impacted the company the most whenever I was trying to make my decision, and what one would help me make a better decision on an EDR tool. And I pretty much came up with these criteria before I even looked at the EDR tool list out there, before I even considered any of those. Just try to do a blind study of this is what my company needs without looking at any of the requirements from any of the EDR or any of the I would say any of the things that the EDR tools could provide. I didn't want to skew any of that. So again, I try to take as much as a scientific approach as I could to this with all the different criteria that I came with or came up with, so that it was very specific to all the needs of my company. And I did a lot of interviews internally with like our infrastructure team, our manufacturing engineers, a lot of the folks that would be managing servers and workstations, and across the gamut, what they would like to see in an EDR tool. Because everyone sees security as a black hole or a black box, and things happen and they don't know what happened and they don't know why something was chosen. So I try to take it as an opportunity to bring our infrastructure team in, to bring our all of our infrastructure teams in with servers and workstations and all the things that they manage, right? So it felt like a more of a partnership, and so they had a lot to do with creating this critical capabilities list as well. Because again, I wanted to make sure it was a right fit for the business, and the only way to do that is go talk to the people in the business, utilizing the systems where this EDR tool would exist.
Makes complete sense, and honestly, such a great approach to figuring out the methodology you guys chose. Talk to us about the specific goals and objectives that you hope to achieve through this EDR bake-off.
Yeah. So one of the things that our infrastructure team and our endpoint team was really adamant about was, we do not want this EDR tool to, impact the basically the overall, I guess, the overall functionality of the endpoint, right? So we know there are some EDR tools that could, spike CPU, consume a lot of memory, take up a lot of disk space or whatever, what have you. And so we really, when they asked us about that, we was like, well, what can we do about that? And one of the things we did was create a very specific SafeBreach scenario where it consisted of over 2,300 different simulations, right? Anywhere from malware, for pre-execution, post-execution, malware drops, etc. Right? So we pretty much called it the kitchen sink scenario, where we tried to find every single EDR or endpoint test that SafeBreach had to offer, and just threw that particular use case at it. And so what that did was, not only did it test the EDR tool that it could block and tackle all those bad things that was happening on the endpoints, but also at the same time, while I was running those tests, I had some other tools running, collecting like perfmon, collecting the baseline of the CPU, memory, disk, and network, and all those different peripheral, or all those different types of metrics, so that during the scenario I could pull all that data back and test what was the impact of this EDR tool running, just sitting there running day to day. What did it look like? And then, while the attacks were happening from the simulator, what spiked when, how often, and what was the impact, right? And so, it could be someone downloading a file that's not really necessarily malware, but it has to be scanned by an EDR tool. What percentage of CPU did it take? What percentage of memory did it take? Was there a cost to the network connection? Was there any kind of IO disk spikes or anything like that, right? So collecting all that information, so leveraging SafeBreach allowed me to simulate those types of scenarios quickly and efficiently. Because again, if I had to do this with actual malware, I would have to have multiple laptops image with the same image, run those on different scenarios, and I would not get 2,300 different simulations, right? I probably would have to pick a handful just for the sake of time to get through those situations, right? So having SafeBreach be able to do the blocking attack, or do the simulations, execute the simulation, then clean itself back up, right? And kind of reset that endpoint or that server back to its baseline, and then run another simulation, and kind of continue that over and over and over again, over 2,300 times. Like that's crazy. That would be like multiple people running, an actual real world scenario, and it probably would take months to come up with that kind of data, where I was able to literally do this within a week of starting my testing and gathering all that information. So having that quote unquote kitchen sink scenario within SafeBreach was very, very valuable.
Awesome. Which specific aspects within the SafeBreach platform did you leverage to perform this EDR bake-off? And were there any specific tests or scenarios? I know you kind of brought this up already, but were there anything specific that you were like, wow, I didn't even know this existed within the platform?
Yeah, there were some aspects of the EDR tools that I didn't know existed that kind of came to fruition. Out of that, there was some interesting, we'll just say like findings of what those EDR tools were actually capable of, right? That was really cool. There was some things that um I'm trying to be very careful because I don't want to give any of the EDR tools away because I want to say completely EDR agnostic, right? Because I don't want to say one is better than the other because again, this was specific to my use case, to my environment, to my company, right? So I don't want to mention any names here, so I'm trying to be careful there. But let's just say there was some expectations to some certain EDR tools that I had that I was a little disappointed in, right? Because you kind of go into these things with some pre, I don't say expectations, but like some assumptions, if you will, right? Maybe it's based off of marketing or just some, experience you've had with people that ran these other tools, and again, all these EDR tools that I baked off are tools I have never used, right? So I was going in with zero expectations from a previous um from previous management of EDR tools. So like I did not know anything about any of these. So it was just as much of a discovery project on all of them as any of them. So that was one thing about it. But some of them stood out with some very specific. Well, I'll just give you a specific example. One of the EDR tools had a where it could protect shadow copies on endpoints, and if you get infected by malware, it actually would it created some false documents and false things on the machine that if ransomware would go after it, it would see that and it would almost as like a honeypot, if you will, and it would stop that from happening, and then it would protect shadow copies. So if you did get hit ransomware and you had legitimate files and folder or whatever that got hit, it would then roll back the malware, which I thought was very impressive, and I had no idea it could do that until we started down this path. Some of the disappointments were, there was one specific EDR tool. Again, maybe it was marketing, maybe it was just some preconceived notions on my end, that did not perform as high or as well as I thought they would have, which was very shocking to me. Again, maybe they just had a bigger marketing budget than some of the other ones, and so it was interesting to see how they fared. And it was nothing where it was business specific for me as much as it was just the good old fashioned blocking and tackling of malware. So those were some of the I guess shocks that I had just coming into it. And then one of the cool things was the actual EDR vendors themselves were like asking. So they found out what I was doing. They're like, well, how did we do it? How did we score? And so I was actually able to share some of the findings with them, and they took that back to their development teams to go look into that and maybe make some improvements on their tools. And so I don't want to, again, every EDR tool is different. You have to find out what's specific for you. But if I could provide any kind of feedback to them, just as a good security practitioner and as we're all good internet citizens, we could share this information and we can make everyone better. So, it was my pleasure to provide all the insight I could to them. So that's pretty much it on that one.
That's really good. I mean, we're all fighting the same bad actors,
Yeah.
right? So anything
Yep.
that we can share with them, that's awesome. We appreciate that. Could you walk us through the EDR testing and grading process that you did? I know you talked about the methodology, but walk us through how you did the grading on this.
Yeah. So, yeah, you have a slide here. So, um, excuse me, I don't want to get too real deep down into this because it took me a while to come up with this and then running each scenario through. But if you look at this EDR process, so I had a basic image and then I had a hardened image. So the basic image helped me understand how would this EDR tool fare just in general, like with no hardening, with no type of GPOs enabled, nothing, just right out of the box, base image. And then how would it fare within my environment on a hardened image that we had already, come up with a standard, image. So that is where I started. And then if you look at, there's different levels of protection, right, within any EDR. So we had different levels of protection, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we had 5 different levels of protection where certain functionality was turned on within that EDR, right? And so we kind of grouped them and found that there was 5 common layers or levels of protection. And so we tested each one. So we had the SafeBreach testing scenario, which again, aka the kitchen sink, right? So we would enable one protection, run it through, record the CPU, memory, IO, the SafeBreach results, and then apply the weighted values that it came up with, which you'll see in the next slide after this, to each one of those results. So we had a total of 10 different results, right? One with the basic image and one with the hardened image. And each one of those had the results of the different levels of protection. And so what this allowed us to do was look at the different levels of protection and figure out what the impact was. And that was our baseline starting line for deployment. So we deployed with the level 3 protection because it was the least likely to have impact in our environment. And at the same time, we were doing some big upgrades and stuff within our SAP environment and different things like that. And we didn't want to cause any kind of disruption. So it allowed us to deploy in a level that we knew was not going to cause any disruption without having to do any kind of application whitelisting or hash whitelisting or anything like that, right? So deploy as is without any kind of interruption. And then we had a phase 2 of our deployment where we went through and looked at all the logs for any impacts, for anything that might have gotten blocked, maybe like the false positives, to go back through, mark all those false positives as clean, and then up the protection level over time. So it really did help us create a deployment strategy, I think, that would help us be successful both as a from a security perspective for securing the endpoints, but also without impacting our environment at the time of deployment. If you go to the next slide, you'll see an example of the critical capabilities and criteria that I had came up with, and then the weights to the values to the right. So just different types of operating system, the environmental protection if you're running VMs or VDI, public cloud, et cetera. Can accommodate air gap scenarios like an OT environment. Installation, does it have sandbox as they're out of any kind of these things like log storage, retentions inside the EDR, like all these things that I had taken into account for the specific types of criteria I wanted to weigh each one of these EDRs against. And if you look to the right, are the weights that I assigned to each one of those. Some of them were like a 10 is a must-have. Like if you don't meet this, then you're going to have a hard time making the cut. And then we had some lesser weighted ones, right? And then some ones that were just like would be nice to haves, right? If he was like a 1 to a 5, things like that. So, and again, this weight was not I didn't come up with this in a vacuum. I consult a lot of the infrastructure team, our endpoint team, some managers and things like that. And so I wanted to really make this an open collaborative thing. So I created the list, put my initial thoughts in there from a weight perspective, and then we just collaborated. Like we took an hour and a half long meeting, and everyone kind of weighed in, and we adjusted the weights up sometimes we adjusted them down. And so and I took it, so I'm the architect, so I took it also the recommendations of our endpoint security engineers. So I wanted to make this as open and collaborative as much as possible on how we made these decisions within the company.
Wow, this is amazing, and I know it's a long process. I've been on the sales side, and when you're in an EDR bake-off with a client, it's so nice to see a strategy like this, right? Rather than just taking one vendor and using everything that they do well in and then grading based on that. So this is awesome. Yeah. So during this EDR bake-off, were there any findings that surprised you or made a huge impact in the choice of the final vendor that you guys decided on?
Yeah, and I kind of alluded to it earlier. One of the EDR vendors surprised me in the fact that I don't know how they do it or how they did it or in the development of their endpoint. We were throwing multiple scenarios at them, so multiple downloads of malware and execution of malware at a time, and we only saw like a 10% increase in resource consumption during the attack. Like overall, that was CPU, memory, disk, like IO and network traffic. And so like it was very minimal. And I would have expected to see something much, I don't know, much higher based off of my previous example or previous usage of other EDR tools. And so I was very surprised. I asked them, I even went back to the vendor. I'm like, how did you guys outperform like these other EDRs with like just the overall impact of your agent, right, on the endpoints? Because that's really some of the biggest gripes I hear from any infrastructure, any endpoint guys, anybody is like your agent consumes so many resources, especially if it's doing a scan or whatever, right? We never saw any more than a 10% total increase of consumption across the uh the overall attack. And even when it was just sitting idle, like it was showing maybe 1.5% on the actual just idleness of the agent sitting there doing nothing. So that was one of the biggest surprises. And some of the feedback I got from the vendor was they are cognizant of that, right? That issue where consumption of resources is a big deal on the endpoints and servers. And so they've actually worked as hard as they can to try to get the agent down to a minimal amount of resources required from a consumption perspective to be able to do what it needs to do. So I was very shocked and pleasantly surprised in that one. Um, One of the biggest shocks of my surprise was one of the major EDR vendors in the industry, and everyone would know them if I said their name. They performed very poorly from a blocking tackling perspective, and from a resource consumption perspective. Like they really hit really hard the endpoint. So it was interesting because these are the things I would never have seen, right? If I would have just taken their word from, oh, we can block this or we can do this. And for the fact that we was able to, pretty much um, test what they are touting, right? That they can do all these things, and put, actual data and numbers to what they're saying, and show, and I don't say prove them wrong, but, give them some feedback on how maybe they can make their products better in the future based off of the findings that I did with SafeBreach.
Yeah, that's awesome. Appreciate that. How did your stakeholders and decision makers respond to the results, like based on this EDR bake-off?
Excuse me. Yeah, so they were actually ecstatic because because I actually presented this to my CISO, and he was like, he asked me all the questions. How did you come up with these numbers? And so I kind of ran him through everything we just talked about. They were ecstatic about it. For one, the collaboration within, the company. Two, the methodology and the data-driven approach to look and decide which EDR to go with, and just having the ability to prove these out. And it was funny because I showed him all this data, and initially we only looked at, I think, 4 different EDRs. And he's like, "How fast could you look I'm sorry, we looked at 3. He's like, "How fast can you look at a fourth one?" I was like, send me who you want me to look at. And I was able to basically, because my lab was already built, so I was able to, reach out to them, get, spin up one of their POC environments, and probably within 4 days get all the data I needed with SafeBreach. So as soon as they stood up the POC, that's the biggest part of the POC console for me to download their agent and get put onto my environment. I just basically ran through the SafeBreach scenarios and recorded the data, and that was that. And it literally took 3 or 4 days to do it. So within a week, I reported my findings the following Monday, and he was thoroughly impressed that I was able to get this spun up, get all the data, get it all, basically in the same format as the rest of it that he thought I was spending, months doing, and have it presented in front of him like, yeah, this is what we found, and show it off. And so if it wasn't for SafeBreach, that would have taken me a lot longer. So kudos to you guys on how the tool works. And I don't know if you guys, I was talking to guy at New York, and I said, I don't know if this was intended for, for what you guys had in mind for SafeBreach, but it very much checked all the boxes for what we needed in order to pick our EDR tool. So I said, I don't know if it's not intended, so feel free to use this as a use case for your next whatever you guys want to for your next use cases. So it worked flawlessly, and I would highly recommend anybody who has SafeBreach to leverage this tool to do this type of testing, because again, it made me look like a rock star in front of all my executive team. And whenever they sent these results to because again, a lot of the stuff goes up to the board, right? Whenever you start buying new tools, the board wants to know which tool you're going with. And they say, well, how did you come up with this? And they presented the, kind of a overall one pager as to how we did it. And they were thoroughly impressed too. So, thanks SafeBreach for making me look like a rock star.
Absolutely. Now, this is a really good use case, and I think we are seeing it a lot more from clients. And in fact, our internal team is hosting a use case workshop for this. I did
Nice.
want to ask, I know you talked about you presenting the data and, the leadership team was impressed. How did it change your visibility within Olin, your background, the way they approach you today?
Yeah. So, I think I started this project. I was about a year in to the company. I've been there for over 2 years now. Um, when I started this, it was a year in, and I think it gave me a lot of visibility within the company because I presented this to my manager. He ran it up to the CISO and above, and everyone was thoroughly impressed. And it was every time they saw it, everyone asked, "Well, who come up with it? Who did this? Who did this?" And so my name started coming up, and so it did get me a high level of visibility with the company. Then that I got some awards for doing this that included monetary values, which was really nice. So I got some awards for this internally, and I also got, just because I guess the level of visibility my work got, they also put me on some other, we call them like center of excellence teams. So it's basically a committee internally. So right now I'm working on that with that committee to discover and figure out like the next generation of AI and where does AI fit within our environment. And so kind of got me into a different level of influence within the company that got me on some committees to help drive some really important decisions from the business aspect. So that was kind of nice.
Wonderful. And I know this is a really tough question, but is the organization happy with the chosen vendor? And has that helped you address the challenges you initially faced?
Absolutely. So some of the feedback I got probably during the implementation phase of pushing the EDR out to all of our endpoints and servers was, we didn't even know. I mean, they were aware because we have, change approval boards that meet twice a week, and we communicate, hey, we're doing this and this is the environment we're pushing to. They knew it was happening, but they didn't feel any effects. So being able to choose the right EDR tool with the right phase of deployment, and the right configurations and everything that we did during the testing helped during the deployment in such a way no one felt any impact to that deployment. No one felt any, I would say, negative recourse to having this deployed. So went without a hitch. The organization was super happy. They I mean, they were happy because no impact. I was happy because we had a superior EDR tool in place protecting our endpoints and our server infrastructure at a level that we did not have before. So it was a win-win situation in my opinion, with the how we deployed and the what we deployed. In my opinion, it was super smooth.
That's awesome. And would this testing or bake-off methodology only apply to EDRs, or do you anticipate taking a similar approach to other security tools that you're looking at in your stack?
Yeah, so we've already started using these tools for our network security stuff. So we have various, firewalls and IPS and all the network security stacks that any enterprise level environment would have. So we've actually already started doing that with those tools and leveraging baselines, looking at, can these tools protect the way we need them to protect? And it's actually going to help us for 2024 to make decisions. Do we need to replace any security stacks, any of those security stacks, right? Do we need to, from a web filtering perspective or from a firewall perspective or an IPS perspective, what tools have gaps that, even if we critique or increase the severity in which we are analyzing our environment, our network traffic, even if we maybe change some of the things that we're doing with those tools, maybe we still have gaps. So we've already started that testing. We're about 2 months in, And so we're running scheduled testing, scheduled scans, looking at the results, going making remediation recommendations, going making the changes to try to have better visibility or better blocking or whatever it is required based off those scans. And so we're going to continue that, and we're going to continue the same thing with our EDR tools, right? So that's just kind of an ongoing, if you will, it's almost like a vulnerability management from an infrastructure perspective, right? So we have, with the Rapid Sevens and the Qualisuses and the Tenables of, scanning your all your infrastructure, your networks equipment and your endpoints and things like that. But this is, taking a much broader view of vulnerability management as much as it is vulnerability gaps, right, within your infrastructure. Because you might have a firewall, you might have an IPS, or you might have an EDR tool, but can it do what it says it's going to do, right? When you start dropping malware in or trying to exfiltrate data out, right? And you have those in place, but are they really truly doing what they are meant to be doing, right? Which is, keeping the bad guys out and continuing to secure the environment. So, we are on a constant cycle of scanning for those types of activities, or opportunities, I should say, to close the gap for any security risk. So it's going to be an ongoing basis, because our environment's very big, it's global, and there's changes being made to the environment all the time. And as we have cloud, we have like a hybrid environment, we have on-prem stuff. So understanding all those changes all the time, we have big groups of firewall engineers, and we have EDR, or we have endpoint guys, and we have server guys. And so anyone can do anything at any time that might create a security gap. And so having this ongoing scan, or I should say scenarios running, that helps us understand where any gaps might be exposed, prevents, the bad actors from getting in. And some of our environment, especially in the OT world, is it's what we call it life impacting circumstances or situations can arise, right? Because if someone was to get access to the wrong stuff, we're a chemical company. People can actually die. Environmental impact is huge, right? You can wipe out entire ecosystems in some places. So we take our security very, very, very seriously, because it doesn't just affect, someone's identity got stolen or credit card, whatever. It's people's lives are at stake at some places, right? Because these plants have highly volatile, combustible chemicals at them, and we have to be very, very careful who has access and how that access is given. So having a tool like SafeBreach, continuously probing all these different, scenarios, all these different infrastructure setups, if you will, helps us secure those environments and continues to help us maintain a level of security, I think, that we're happy with.
Awesome. Hey, it lets you sleep better at night, so we're all
That's
for
right.
that.
That's right.
Awesome. I know we have some time for Q&A. I can't look at the time. So yeah, we have some time for Q&A. I wanted to open it up to the floor to see if there were any questions.
At this point, just want to remind everyone, please if you have any questions, leverage the Q&A functionality in Zoom webinar to submit those questions. We do have a question here in terms of objectivity. I know Stephen, you mentioned that it was specifically leveraged the Gartner framework to kind of determine. Did you ever run into any kind of pushback from these vendors, or okay, the first question is, did you ever share the results of these challenges with the vendors, and did you get any sort of pushback from the vendors pertaining to the results of these challenges?
Yeah, so we would share our findings, and most of the people there's always a sales aspect of it, right? A sales account manager, and then there's like a sales engineer. I try to steer more with the sales engineer, because they're the technical folks. The sales account manager usually try to come up with a lot of excuses. We're doing this. It's not a fair. They always try to say it's not a fair test, or it doesn't really truly prove whatever, right? So they try to come up with a bunch of excuses. Sometimes they would just own it. And so if you come at me, you're any vendor, and we see that, and I, that's kind of my job as a security architect. I poke holes in their in their sales pitches, and I ask the hard questions for them to go answer. And if they come up with this, oh well, it's this and it's that, and we don't understand, this, and they try to make excuses and him and haw, I'm just like, okay, I don't really want to have the conversation with you then, right? But if you were to, own it and say, yeah, we know there's a gap, we have a roadmap, and we're looking to address it, then I'll have a little bit more respect for you and maybe have a furthering conversations. But again, I try to talk more with the technical guys and the sales engineer side, because most of those guys would say, "Oh yeah, we know that's a gap, and we're looking to address it." So if you do have pushback with your vendors, try to talk to the more technical folks, because they're usually more on the, well, and I try to get those guys on a call without their sales guys on, right, because they're the ones trying to push to make the sale. But the sales engineers usually will kind of, most cases, if you have a good one, will say, "Yeah, we know there's a gap, and I understand why it's not working for you." Blah blah blah. So yeah, we definitely did have some pushback, and some, him and hawing around, not taking accountability for that stuff. So yeah, did I answer the question?
Yeah, it did. And
Okay.
the kind of the follow-up question of that is obviously because SafeBreach updates their playbooks very frequently against a wide variety of attacks,
Mm-hmm.
and there are new capabilities that you can test with when you're trying to integrate with a bunch of tools in your ecosystem. Have you thought of, or is there any plan to leverage SafeBreach to, say, potentially suggest a new feature in your existing EDR that might kind of help secure your environment in a bit better manner?
Yeah. So actually, we sit on, so the ER that we currently are with, we sit on their customer advisory board. And I went there a couple months ago. They had their customer advisory board met down in Florida, and we with using SafeBreach and leveraging some of the scenarios, we made some suggestions, and we said, hey, listen, we like the tool. Here's some things that we've seen that maybe are some gaps that if you guys could address, that would be fantastic. And they took those into consideration back to their technology pipeline.
That's really good to hear because it's not just ensuring you have protection against current stuff, but if there's something that comes up tomorrow and there are obviously gaps in your preferred EDR, you can have them be understanding enough that they would be willing to kind of work with you. So that definitely
Yeah,
is another thing that BAS can be used as well. That you continue probing to try and get the best possible security posture for your organization. Uh,
absolutely.
that being said, I think we are at the end of time at this point. And so I would just like to remind everyone that as this webinar was being recorded, this will be shared via email and it will be available online on our website as well. So thank you again, Stephen, for taking the time to chat with us, share your insights, share your methodology, share Roland's methodology. And thank you, Shalini, for moderating this session. Everyone have a wonderful rest of the day and a rest of the week. Take care.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.